The King Eternal Monarch is a 2020 Korean drama about a king from a parallel universe who winds up crossing into our timeline, you know, the dark timeline.
Yeah, people aren't gonna die. It's just terrible, but like, inevitable?
And hanging around a police officer who he believes saved him as a child. Now, I personally had some reservations about this show when I saw it was written by Kim Eun-suk, who is kind of a divisive writer in Korea. People either love or hate her work, and for me personally, her shows either hit the mark perfectly, like Goblin,
내가 이 가방을 도로 빼앗기느니 차라리 아저씨를 사랑하겠어요.
or miss it entirely, like The Heirs.
여동생이 너무 제 취향이네요.
Also, I'm not a huge fan of Lee Min-ho. I've just not really liked a lot of his work recently, and when I've gone back to try and rewatch some of his earlier work that I enjoyed before,
남자 게이야.
게이. 형. 그 여자가 나한테 뭐라는 줄이나 알아?
왜 뭐 사귀지?
아니. 걔. 됐어.
근데 저 남자들 분위기가 영 좀 이상하다. 뽀뽀하고 싶다. 요번에 그치 좀만 더 마지막으로.
well, yeah. However, I am a really big fan of Kim Go-eun, and I also just really wanted to be part of the conversation because I don't like feeling left out. So, I decided to give it a shot despite hearing less than kind things about it.
어때? 재밌어?
아니요, 재미없어요.
And also arriving late to the show. After watching it, the first thing I've got to say is that I hate that for the alternate timeline, Korea is actually spelled with a C. While watching it, I noticed that the Hangul writing of Korea was different too, with it appearing as Daehanchaeguk. Now, I don't know a lot about the Korean language or Korea as a whole, except what I learned from K-dramas, which is that poor spunky girls marry rich assholes.
사과해요. 난 아까 했잖아, 부딪힐 때. 쌍방 과실인데 그쪽도 해야지.
쌍방 아니었거든?
Ghosts are everywhere, just chilling.
야, 네 커피 여기 있잖아. 왜 내 사이다를 넌 봐?
And there's some random area out in the wilds that never moved past the Middle Ages.
여기 뭐 의상을 좀 보아하니 영화 촬영소죠? 촬영하다가 무슨 사고가 난 거고 경찰이 알까봐 쉬쉬하면서 의사 하나 납치해서 뭐 어떻게 해보자 이거죠? 맞죠?
뭘 하시는 겁니까?
I do know that the Korean name for Korea is Daehanmingguk. And after much academic research, I learned that Daehanchaeguk means Korean Empire, which would make sense because in this alternate timeline, Korea is ruled by a monarchy. But this also begs the question, why wasn't Korea just spelled with a K? Why couldn't you just translate this as Korean Empire, or even keep it the way you had it as Kingdom of Korea, but just spell it with a K? Why change the spelling? It's so confusing. Were you worried as plebs in America wouldn't know that South Korea is a democratic republic and not a monarchy? Actually, you know, that's fair, that's really fair. What most Americans know about South Korea right now is that BTS is from there, and it might not be the communist one, but it still could be. North and South are very hard to keep straight. Another annoying tendency of this show is that things are set up and explained poorly. Something will happen out of the blue and then will immediately be exposited about after the fact, which is bad storytelling. I'm assuming this is happening because it's the first 2 episodes and the creators are trying to make exciting situations and keep the viewers hooked by their curiosity for what's happening, or they're trying to make sure they're not starting off too exposition heavy, even though they kind of are because they're still just explaining things, but just in a weird order. It just doesn't work. It keeps kicking me out of the story because these characters are doing things that make absolutely no sense or contradicts what little we know about them. And when I'm talking about things that don't make sense, I am not talking about contrivances like Lee Min-ho being so flippant about alternate timelines that you'd assume he too had a conversation with Tilda Swinton about the multiverse.
나는 대한제국의 황제이고 수상한 자를 쫓다가 천둥과 번개가 치는 차원의 공간을 넘어 이곳에 왔네. 잠시 당황스러웠으나 찬찬히 다시 생각을 해보니 아마도 이곳은 평행 세계인 것 같네.
Or how he's so fixated on the person that saved him who he barely saw 25 years ago that for some reason he refuses to have any romantic relationships nor marry anyone because he wants to make the woman who saved him his queen.
정틀경이 내가 자넬 내 황후로 맞이하겠다.
뭐?
or the fact that Kim Go-eun is helping to take care of him despite thinking he's crazy, because he's acting super crazy.
널 방으로 맞이하겠다.
I'm talking about things like Edom getting into the house of his alternate persona after running into the alternate king on the street. The scene itself is good and makes sense and would be engaging, except it plays out almost entirely before we learn that the alternate king is dead now. As soon as he walks into that apartment, you wonder where the alternate king is. Especially once you see the alternate Edom, who is as defenseless as a living conscious person could be. And because Edom has already been set up as a cold and methodical killer. You're spending a good portion of the beginning of the scene wondering where the alternate king is, and paying more attention to the background trying to find him in the shadows because you're concerned by what's going to happen, and of course the alternate king would want to check on his brother after having such a wild run-in. And even if you wouldn't want to check in on him, there's no way he just let a random person into his apartment, especially if his brother can't protect himself from random people. Even if you guess what happened to the alternate king before it's revealed, you've already wasted time worrying about that instead of what was actually happening on the screen. Or like how Lee Min-ho chases after a random person in a jacket with bunny ears because some little girl told him he should follow the bunny like Alice.
짐은 아직 여자친구가 없다.
그럼요. 폐하도 시계토끼를 따라가세요.
이 폐하도
Also, can we take a moment to appreciate again the fact that this show is clearly drawing parallels between itself and Alice in Wonderland while also having a crowd of kids go on about how boring the story is? What were the creators thinking?
그럼 책을 더 읽어야겠구나. 앨리스는
Anyway, he just takes off after this random person without any shoes or protection, no guards. This person who has A, been king for 25 years, and B, walked in on his father's assassination and then was nearly assassinated himself because he had no protection. And the scene doesn't go anywhere because the person just disappears. And it seems like it was done more to prompt the conversation where Lee Min-ho explains that he's obsessed with Kim Go-eun. This wouldn't be so bad in and of itself, except it makes his obsession absurd because it's a pretty flimsy excuse for his actions. But ridiculous reasons or not, it would still have been better to know that than to have no context at all. And this is really odd to me because Kim Eun-suk actually demonstrates in the second episode that she knows how to do this right. Like in that birthday party scene where the mother and the kid in the wheelchair and his awful classmates who only go to make fun of the fact that he can't walk and then run off. After the birthday kid disappears, Edom goes up to the mother and suggests that instead of wishing her son could walk, that she should be wishing instead that the other kids couldn't either.
당신 아이가 걷게 되는 그런 일은 일어나지 않는다고. 대신 저 아이들의 다리를 절개할 수는 있습니다.
And aside from a radio broadcast talking about how 3 elementary students had been injured, we don't really know much more of what's going on. The scene doesn't contradict the characterization we've already had for Lee Lim, but it's still vague enough on his part that we're curious to know what he's plotting here, why it involves this mother, and why he would go out of his way to seriously injure a bunch of kids to get her on his side. It fits in with the show and draws the audience in. I'm assuming this was just a thing within the first episode because it doesn't really happen in the second, and I never noticed this happening before in her other shows that I've actually watched. But it is still really distracting and annoying to watch, and makes me worry about the quality of the rest of the show, especially because there are also so many contrivances on top of the bad exposition. And even though I've already copped to the fact that I'm not really an Lee Min-ho fan, it's not because I think he's a bad actor. I haven't really cared for the shows he's chosen to be in.
허노아 전도사님? 할렐루야! 할렐루야!
But I've never really had a problem with him specifically, except for this show, because I think he was miscast, and I think that for 2 reasons. Now, hear me out. The first is because he cannot do this brand of humor. Half of his jokes are delivered so poorly, it takes me a second to realize they're jokes and not just awkward dialogue, and the other half just falls so flat.
아유, 어이없네. 에이.
즉위 이래 내게 이리 무엄한 여인은 자네가 처음이야. 자넨 참수야.
어?
구충이는 일정대로 2시간 후에 보자고 해.
And it's not that the comedy isn't there, because when it's in scenes without him, it works fine.
근데 아까 진짜 뭐? 아줌마?
누가 봐도.
It's just his scenes that aren't working. And the second reason is that he doesn't really seem to have a lot of chemistry with the rest of the cast. Not with Kim Go-eun
못한.
or even Woo Do-han with either his Republic version or his Kingdom version. To be fair, his character honestly seems pretty poorly written, although that might be the acting, I don't know. At least so far. The others are playing characters that feel like people, while Egon feels like he's been plucked right out of a fanfiction where the writer was less concerned with realism or development than they were with the fantasy, which is fine, and there is a place for that. But that's not the type of story Kim In-suk has written here, so he doesn't really seem to fit in with the story as a whole. Like, they're clearly trying to go with the fish out of water angle while he's in the Republic.
이 세계는 황제가 아니라 여왕이 통치하는군. 꽤 사랑받는 모양이고.
사랑하지. 퀸녀나. 전 국민이 다 사랑하지.
그건 나랑 같군.
But he didn't really fit in super well in the Kingdom timeline either, so it doesn't really work. Also, I guess this isn't a complaint about this show specifically, but it is something that I find very confusing and kind of annoying. Korea, why are you so obsessed with having super good-looking rich guys eat super banal food for the first time and act like it's the most amazing thing they've ever tasted? Like, I guess I could just wave it off if it's for product placement, but it never is. Usually it's in a random stall with tteokbokki or something. Even in this show with it being fried chicken and he's losing his mind because of the sauce, there's no product placement. In fact, this scene is really odd to me because it looks like it was structured for there to be a product placement, but they couldn't secure it, which seems a little crazy because this is a Kim In-suk show, and also Lee Min-ho's come back after being discharged from the military. This scene is just double baffling for me. Somebody explain, please, I beg. Please explain this to me. I don't get it. I don't get it in other shows, and I especially don't get it here. What is happening? Kim Go-eun. Period. I've been a big fan of her since she's in the trap.
아 진짜 둘 다 닥쳐요. 한놈 퍽하면 삐지고 하면 툭하면 뭐 사달라 그러고.
걔들 취했냐?
누가 개털이야? 모발이 조금 굵은 천연 곱슬 따라해.
So I'm happy that she's taking more lead roles in dramas since I tend to forget to keep up with Korean movies. I've heard that some people aren't too happy with her being the lead because she was already the lead in Goblin, but I don't have any problems with writers working with the same actors for multiple projects, and she's doing a fantastic job with the character and making her distinct from the last show.
아저씨 이거 뭔지 모르죠? 사실 얘 아저씨예요.
야, 볼이 발그레하니 핑크색인데 뭘 아저씨야.
말고요. 얘가 사실은 도깨비인데 사람들이 자기를 무서워하니까 자기가 제일 좋아하는 메밀묵을 뒤집어 쓰고 도깨비 아닌 척하고 있는 거거든요. 되게 귀엽죠? 제 말 무슨 뜻인지 알죠?
I also should mention Elim's actor, Lee Jung-jin, who's also doing great, and whose scenes keep pulling me in sometimes, even despite how hard the show is trying to keep me out. And I'm not even mad about Woo Do-han being here. I think he's doing a great job. I also think the director, Bang San-sung, is doing a really good job here. His last time directing a Kim In-suk show was when he co-directed Descendants of the Sun before he went on to direct Love in the Moonlight. Interestingly, here he seems to be creating shots influenced by Lee Young-bok, who co-directed Descendants and solo-directed Goblin. The style here is a bit reminiscent of Goblin, using interesting shots and pushing them to whimsical levels to enhance the story and make it feel magical. Let's just take another moment to appreciate this sequence shot and edited to denote time passing. That is the good stuff. Or at least the stuff I'm here for. It might not actually be good. I enjoy it. I like it. I think it's pretty. I also really like the police group, both in that I enjoy police stories, and I also like the characters and their group dynamic so far. I'm also really liking the character Jung Tae-il so far. There's got to be more than I liked. I like that Kim Young-ok is in this show. It always makes me happy to see her, and I'm glad she's got more than a cameo here and seems like she's going to be popping up a lot.
구충리도 막 끌려서 매번 일정보다 일찍 오나? 이러다 구충리가 황후가 되겠는데.
아이고 그녀는
Please don't take that as a challenge. Let's see here. This scene, I liked it. It was funny. I had a laugh. Oh yeah, the action. I really liked how they did the action. It seemed really well done and more like an actual fight and not over stylized, except for the roundhouse kick. But they make up for the roundhouse kick by throwing a guy's legs against some monkey bars, which is probably just as unlikely to happen, but looks cooler and is more original. And I guess that's it. So, Will I continue watching the show, and would I recommend it to others? Well, honestly, if Kim In-suk and Kim Go-eun weren't attached to the show, I probably wouldn't do either. The show honestly kind of feels like a bunch of amateurs trying to imitate Kim In-suk's shows were given a ridiculous amount of funding for this project and managed to actually get talented people attached. Aside from everything I've already talked about, I also am just not that into alternate Korean histories where they're still ruled by a monarchy instead of transitioning into a democratic republic. And I have not since about 8 years ago when I watched Princess Hours and despised it.
경고하는데 입단속 못하면 네 신변 온전치 못할 거야.
뭐야? 어이 상씨 완전 왕 싸가지네.
And that was back in my halcyon days when I actually finished almost all of the shows that I started because I wouldn't let myself start another show without finishing the one that I'd previously been watching. Although this wasn't always a good idea because I probably wouldn't have such deep set hatred for Gung if I had just let myself not finish it. I tried giving the trope another try with Empress, but either the show was not great or I was still not ready because I don't think I even finished the first episode before I got bored and peaced out. By the time I learned what the King Eternal Monarch was about, I was like, an alternate timeline? Where Korea is ruled by a monarchy still? That's so original, Philip K. Dick is quaking. Bottom line though, I'm going to give it more of a try, both because of who's attached to it, and there were some moments that I did genuinely enjoy. Would I recommend it? At this point, it's really hard for me to. If you're a big fan of Lee Min-ho, I might, since his acting style might be par for the course with him, and I'm just unaware because I just haven't really watched him recently. And if you like modern monarchies in Korea, maybe, but at this point, outside of that, I'd say give it a pass. Anyway, that was my first impression of the King Eternal Monarch. Please leave a comment letting me know if you plan on checking the show out, or if you already have and what your thoughts are.
Almost